Hello, I'm Romy Nolan. I'm a Year 9 student at Northcote High School, and today I'll be welcoming speakers and facilitating our discussion. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone, if they haven't already, to put their phones on silent. Cool. So now I'd like to introduce Garen Steele to do a Welcome to Country.
Thank you, everyone. Is this working? Yep. Geez, it was really cold this morning. Who had trouble getting out of bed? Yeah, quite a few of us. I did. But there's one word that sort of resonates with me, and it really helps me when times are hard and when I know I need to get out of bed and face the day, face my issues, not just getting out of bed in the morning, but facing life and addressing the things that I need to do. And that word is a word that's been around this country a lot longer than many of our ancestors have. And that word is the word Wominjeka. Wominjeka is becoming a bit of a catchphrase for Indigenous heritage in Melbourne. You know, we use it for our schools. We have Wominjeka this and Wominjeka that. If you're coming in from the airport, you would have seen Wominjeka Warrangi Balak. And we often use this word for welcome as a greeting. But the truth is it means so much more than welcome. You see, it's not a greeting. It's not an invitation. At its core, Wominjeka is a directive. So it's three words together, or two words in an intonation. So woman, je is the directive, meaning you're being told to do something. And ka is purpose. So it means come with your purpose. And that's what gets me out of the bed in the morning, more than my coffee does. Purpose is what gets me out of bed because I know I need to do it. And I was about 30 when I finally found my purpose in life. So I look across this crowd of really young people, and you've already found your purpose, and you really need to think about what it is if you haven't figured it out now. And just to give you sort of some help with that, it's got to be something. It can't be just something small. Your purpose has to be something big. It's got to be bigger than you. It's got to be bigger than life. And I think that's what we've got here today. We've got a reason to get out of bed. We've got a reason to come here and make a change, a resonating change, a meaningful change. And what I want to talk about in my next part is some of the sort of things that can help us make that change. Some knowledge, some generational knowledge that's been passed down my family for thousands and thousands of generations that helps me achieve my purpose. So in the words of my ancestors, we say, Wominjeka, come with purpose. Meram big big bunarong nemda barabta natulam. Means come with purpose to my beautiful home, land of the two bays. And this welcome to country is a representation of what we used to call Tanderum. Tanderum is, if you don't know, is a compact between the traditional custodians of the land and people that are coming to do their purpose, so people like yourselves. And what it is, it's an intrinsic promise that if you abide by certain rules and values, then you will be protected and supported by the traditional custodians. And the story goes back to our creation story. So it was back to our Dreamtime story, if you want to call it that, where the lands where we meet today, where we live and work, were created by our creator spirit, Bunjil. So Bunjil, if you don't know, travels as the wedge-tailed eagle. And he created the lands and the rivers and the mountains with his spear. And he created the Bunurong people, or the Kulin people. And he taught them about their special relationship that they have with the land. So that they have this circular relationship with the land. So we don't so much as own the land, but rather we belong to the land. We have to provide to the land so it can provide back to us. And we have to live within this circular relationship, within these laws and guidelines that create this circular relationship between us and the land. And if we don't, that's when things go wrong. So we have a story about the bay flooding. So the bay, the Port Phillip Bay, if you know it, wasn't always there. It wasn't there until about 6,000 years ago. And the story goes that we broke law. We broke law with our neighbours, We broke law with the land and we broke law with Bunjil. And so Bunjil turned his back and the seas rose. And it wasn't until the Bunurong approached Bunjil and begged him to stop the oceans from rising that he told us that we have to stay within this relationship. Now, he also asked the Bunurong to do one more thing. It wasn't just to create this sustainable relationship. We had to do it for everyone that came here. So I'm responsible for everything that you do here on the lands where we live and work. And it was done through a promise, or two promises. The first promise is really easy, so I won't talk about it too long. Don't harm the land, don't harm the children of Bunjil. We can get that. I don't need to explain it any more than that. It's the second one that's a little bit more difficult. It was to honour and respect the ways of Bunjil. Now this is really difficult because I'm willing to bet there's probably not many people would know what those ways are. So how do we abide by things that we don't know? That's why I'm here. So basically we have three guiding principles, three guiding values that should be guiding everything that we do today. And these are values that you should be incorporating today in order to commit to that second promise. Now the first one is, it's about youth, it's about future generations. And if we do things right today, there should always be future generations. But it's about knowledge and thinking about what knowledge really means to us. You see, when we think of knowledge today, we often think about the things that we learn at school. You know, we advance ourselves by gaining knowledge. But when we look at it from an Indigenous perspective, knowledge is about responsibility. Because once you have knowledge, what do you do with it? You then become responsible for that knowledge that you have. You have responsibility to the truth of that knowledge, because there's a difference between truth and knowledge. You have a responsibility to the truth of that knowledge, but also the continuity of that knowledge. How does that knowledge survive past your lifespan? How do you pass that knowledge to the next generation so that we're not always reinventing the wheel? Right? So we think of knowledge as a responsibility. The second value is the value about community. I think this is a really important one today. We call it celebration. So the last one was Yulenge. Can we all say Yulenge? Yulenge. Okay, that's knowledge or responsibility for knowledge. The next one is community. And the word that we use for this value is not community, it's actually celebration. Because celebration is a really interesting thing. This is what we call a celebration here. So we've got all these people from different walks of life, different age groups, different genders, different perspectives, different schools, different skill sets, and we're all coming here today because we have a common purpose. And that's what celebration in Indigenous community is. It's coming together for a shared purpose. But there's two parts to that. The first thing is we have to identify what our common purpose is. So what is the thing that makes us all the same? What is the thing that we value, that we all need? Right? That's the first step. The second step is valuing, this is a really important one, valuing the differences that we bring. So while we do have those things in common, we have to value the things that are different. Value different opinions, different perspectives, different thoughts, different experiences, different skill sets. They're all important. We need them all because they make our community so much stronger. It increases our capabilities. So when we think about this, applying it today, you know, we're not going to win these fights by overcoming our enemies. We have to turn our enemies into our allies. We have to find that common purpose so that everyone's working towards the same goal, no matter how different they are. Now the third value, and this is the value that's really important to the Welcome to Country, is what we call honouring sacred ground. And you might call it connection to country. So, you know, often we think of Indigenous people having a very special connection to the lands because they have generations and generations and generations that have lived on these lands and used these lands. They have knowledge about these lands. And so we often stay away. If you're non-Indigenous, you might have a feeling that you might need to stay away from that because that's not your business. But I would challenge that. I would definitely challenge that because as Australians, most of us would subscribe to 200 or so years of history. And it's not very long. If we do that, if we're only subscribing to that 200 years of history, we're denying ourselves the 60,000 years of history, of human history, that came before that. And there's evidence and there's things that have been left behind during that 60,000 years of history. It's just like knowledge we identified as an important thing, but story and place, about the places where we live and work. And that's something that can really drive us, drive our value, because we feel so much more connected to the land that we're fighting for, right? Because we're not just connected to being here for 5 generations or 6 generations. We're connected to the whole 60,000 years of generations of people being here and working for that land. We're connected to that knowledge. So we're denying ourselves if we're only subscribing to that 200 years. How can we do this? How can we honour sacred ground as non-Indigenous Australians? Well, one way is when you do your meetings and your gatherings like this, you have your welcome to country. You have a traditional owner out and do that. Or when you're doing your meetings, you do your acknowledgements. But if you're only doing those 2 things, you're only doing it halfway. What about when you go home? What happens then? Do you stop acknowledging country? Do you stop honouring sacred ground? Do you stop connecting to country? Well, I would argue that. I think that that's when it's most important. And the ways that you can take the first step, if you haven't already, is just learn a bit about the places where you live or where you work or where you go to school. So, and there's little bits of history that can sort of connect that for you. I'll give you an example. Who here can speak more than 4, and don't include the ones I taught you today, 4 Bunurong words or Kulin words? Well, I bet every one of you can do that. So who knows the suburb of Toorak? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, everyone knows Toorak. Expensive houses, probably never going to live there, or I might live there. But that is the Bunurong word for Turuk, right? It means it's like the reeds in the wetlands. Next to Toorak we have Paran. I love the word Paran because it's not so much a word or a person or a place. It's the sound of water that goes over the rocks. And we all came from the airport. Been to the airport at some stage. There's this story about this man who stole vegetables from a garden in Hawthorne, so he was imprisoned. And he burnt the prison to escape. He was an Aboriginal man called Tullamarine, or Tullamarine. So when we want to escape Melbourne, we seek out Tullamarine and we fly out of here. But he didn't do it alone. He was with a man. He was with his brother, and his brother's name was Muni Muni, or Moonee Ponds. And they escaped to a resting place called Murrabin or Murrabin. So we've got all these Indigenous words around us, and then we're using them all the time. And we may even live in these places, but how do we connect to them? And that's the question I'll leave with you. So if we can commit ourselves to those 3 values, so I'll repeat them again: knowledge or responsibility for knowledge, community, and honouring sacred ground, we can honour that second promise of honouring and respecting the ways of Bunjil. And I can say in the words of my ancestors once more, Wamanjeka, Marambik Bunrong Namda Barabtan Atugulam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Garen, for your welcome to country. A lot of what you were saying really rings true for this discussion, because it really is about caring for country and taking the knowledge that we have of climate change and moving it towards action. That's what we're here to talk about today. So welcome, everyone. It's great to see all of you here today. I'd also like to pay a particular welcome to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. We're here to have a conversation on culture and climate action. This conversation is part of Yo-Yo Ma's Bach Project's Day of Action. So welcome to the incredible Yo-Yo Ma. And thank you so much for supporting. Thank you so much for supporting Climate to produce this student-led conversation today. And thank you as well for the amazing concert last night. It really was incredible and unforgettable. We're fortunate here to have all areas of expertise and interest, not only in the speakers, but in all of you, which is why we want everyone to be part of this conversation. So we all know we're in a climate emergency. But what does this mean? How do we communicate what has to happen and what we should do? Our speakers have been asked to consider what we must do in the next 10 years to act. And how can a cultural response to the climate crisis make us understand and act? Can culture move us from awareness to action? We've asked our guests to prepare to speak for 5 to 7 minutes. So when you hear the bell, that means time's up. So how will it work? We're going to start with artist and activist Gabrielle de Vietri, and then we'll hear from Harriet, Alara and Daisy. And Yo-Yo Ma, David Caroli, Bronwyn Johnson and Peter Doherty are here to be part of our discussion and answer questions and, join in, yeah. But we also really want to hear from all of you. So if you have a burning question, please raise your hand and one of our volunteers will get a mic to you. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Everything is allowed. We're going with the flow. As Greta Thunberg said, no one is too small to make a difference. And it's going to take everyone, that is you all and us, to be part of this conversation. We've provided some information on your chairs about all the speakers, so as not to take too long introducing everyone, as we're here for only a short time and we have a lot of important things to discuss. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and speakers, feel free to ask questions of each other as well. And that's, at the end of our conversation, Yo-Yo Ma will play for us, which is such a treat. And now I'd like to welcome Gabrielle.
Thank you so much, Romy. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and the land on which I work, the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to acknowledge that it is stolen land and that sovereignty was never ceded, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Indigenous and First Nations people here today. And also say what an honour it is to speak alongside Alara, who's an amazing member of Seed Mob and Yoda Yoda Woman, and to thank Garen for his wonderful welcome to country and for passing on that knowledge about language, which is a privilege. Thank you. So I'll introduce a little bit about a story about myself before moving on to something a little more interactive. I used to make work as an artist which was whimsical, poetic commentary on the human condition. I made relationship contracts presented in a filing cabinet in a gallery. I invented a 3-team footy game. I created a catalogue of ideas, and my career was on an upward trajectory. Then, a few years ago, I was invited to exhibit at the Sydney Biennale. I had 2 years to make the work of a lifetime. This was my big break. Who knows what would happen next? Maybe the Shanghai Biennale or Istanbul Biennale, Venice even. Skip forward 2 years, and the opening day was fast approaching. My work had been shipped in 2 8-ton trucks onto Cockatoo Island, just out of Sydney, and it was almost finished. Then I discovered something. The sponsor, the main sponsor of the Biennale, was negotiating a contract with the Australian government to take over the operation of the detention centres on Manus Island and Nauru. This is where thousands of adults and children are imprisoned in horrific conditions just for seeking safety in Australia. After meetings and discussions and many sleepless nights, I withdrew my work alongside 4 other people before the show had even opened. We made sure it counted. We made sure that the media, that the public, that Transfield and the Australian government were talking about it. Then 4 more artists withdrew their work. George Brandis threatened the Attorney General. He threatened to pull funding. Malcolm Turnbull denounced our vicious ingratitude. Those were his words. But we did the right thing. The chair of the Biennale and the director of Transfield resigned. He took his family's money, 11% of the company, out of Transfield, and he revoked the right for them to use the Transfield name and logo. They were forced to change their name to Broad Spectrum. Superannuation funds divested from Transfield. Their share prices plummeted, and they were forcibly bought out by a Spanish company called Ferrovial, which announced shortly afterwards that they would no longer service the detention centres at the earliest opportunity. This experience fundamentally altered my understanding of what art can and should do. I became aware of how complicit we are in the destruction of humanity and of the environment just by participating in things that seem innocuous or beneficial even. And it shook me to the core that the most significant thing that I did with my art was to withdraw it. So when Geren tells me to come with purpose, the question I now ask myself is, what is that purpose? As an artist, I wanted to know, does art have the potential to change the injustice in the systems that we inhabit? Does it have the potential to truly transform society, to interrupt the economics of business as usual? What are the choices that we're making every day to challenge or endorse the status quo? I formed an artist activist group called the Artist Committee to test these ideas. We shrouded Picasso's Weeping Woman to draw attention to the National Gallery of Victoria's contract with human rights abusers, Wilson Security. A single cellist played a song composed by filmmaker, writer, and Manus Island detainee Behrouz Boochani. And the arts play a really important role in art washing some of the most unethical and polluting companies of the world. This year I created a network map that shows the countless connections between our major arts institutions and some of the most polluting companies in the fossil fuels in Australia. The companies that contribute the most towards climate change are all cosy with our major arts organisations here in Australia. Chevron, ExxonMobil, BHP, Woodside. They attach themselves to the ballet, the opera, the orchestra, the visual arts. They attach themselves to the things we love most, because if we bring them down, we will think that we have to bring down the things we love too. We have so much work to do in this field, and I'm still working out how to do that. I'd love to talk more about this, but we do have limited time, and so instead, for the rest of my time, I'd like to play a game with you. It's called Stand Up, Sit Down. It's very simple. I'm going to say some statements, and if you feel that these statements resonate with you, if you agree with them or they sound like you, I want you to stand up. And if they don't, if you don't agree with them or they don't resonate with you, I want you to sit down. And of course, there's always the option to hover. Okay, so if it's an it depends, or if it's sometimes true, or if you have to qualify it in some way, you can hover. That's fine. Okay, are we ready? So stand up if you agree, sit down if you disagree, hover if it's an I don't know. So stand up if you believe that art is a powerful unifier of people from all walks of life. Okay. Sit down. Stand up if you believe that art is elitist and exclusive. You can believe both things at the same time, that's fine. Art is full of contradictions. Okay, sit down. Stand up if you quietly panic about climate change on most days. Okay, sit down. Stand up if you think that our response as a community to climate change is appropriate to the scale of the crisis. That encapsulates my response exactly. Stand up if you think that the arts help us imagine a better future. Okay, sit down. Stand up if you believe that art can distract us or conceal from what is going on elsewhere. Okay, sit down. 2 more. Stand up if you think that when it comes to art and social change, a conversation is more important than a spectacle. I'm a hover for that one. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Stand up if you feel that your potential to be part of change is being fully exercised. Okay, sit down. Now, the last thing I'd like you to do is to quickly, because we don't have much time, talk to the person next to you about something that you would like to get involved in or start to be part of the solution. Go. Someone you haven't come with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe joining other.
Okay.
Too many
Something that you would like to get involved in or start to be part of the solution. You're
joining just kind of put my voice out there.
I'd like to be involved
Help the message like this.
And there's other stuff like
What about you?
be like, yeah, going well.
So
Yeah, like there's no also breaking the national climate change that really great like get attention and then hopefully
You can always not participate in anything
that
that's
somewhere and sure
That's
people
pretty cool.
that like
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. I'm sure those conversations have a lot more mileage in them. I wonder if any of you decided to invite your friends around for an afternoon tea and letter writing to your MP. Or maybe it was to join one of the many climate action groups working in lots of different ways to hold power to account. Or to petition your local shop on packaging. Maybe you organise a river cleanup. Or maybe you're going to start a blockade of BHP in Melbourne. Any one of you can do any of those things. If you're a minor, I'm not giving you permission. But, there is no need to seek permission, and no one is going to give it to you anyway. And I know a lot of you are already doing the incredible and exhausting work that needs to be done, so thank you. Continue to be bold, be thoughtful, and never assume that someone else is going to take care of it. We need to do this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gab. Now we're going to hear from Harriet.
Hi. I'm also going to start with a story, but it's one I wrote, and it's sort of a cautionary tale. So, once upon a time, there lived 2 cows named Buttercup and Geoffrey, who lived in a glorious paddock filled with daisies. Surrounding their paddock, as far as they could see, were hundreds of other fields like their own, inhabited by all different cow breeds, which varied so much from each other that, as was the rumour, some of the cows had come to more closely resemble hippos. Buttercup was much older than Geoffrey, who was still only a child, so she took it upon herself to be ringleader. She also considered herself more qualified for the job, regardless of age, as it had been she who planted the daisies, which were their collective most prized possession. It was Buttercup's suspicion that the other cows envied her for these fine flowers. On one particularly beautiful day, when Buttercup and Geoffrey were gallivanting in their field, they noticed something very peculiar. The cows in the neighbouring paddocks looked quite ill. Neither of them thought too much of it at the time, as they preferred to focus on their own prosperous field of lush grass and happy daisies. But as the days went on, Geoffrey noticed that it was getting worse. So one day he decided to ask the cow next door what was going on. and he was startled to hear that the cows were dying from hay fever, which was caused, the other cow explained, from the daisies that grew in Buttercup and Geoffrey's field. Astonished, Geoffrey ran back and told Buttercup what he had learned. She thought for a long time before responding, only to say that it was not true. Confused, Geoffrey asked why the other cows would lie, and Buttercup explained that it was because they were jealous, and Geoffrey chose to believe this. Slowly, this rare hay fever disease began to kill all the grass, including in Buttercup and Geoffrey's field. Geoffrey asked whether they should kill the daisies since they seemed to be the cause, but Buttercup explained that something this beautiful could never harm the grass. Geoffrey wasn't sure. He inquired as to what they should do then to solve this problem, and Buttercup answered simply that they should look away. From this day onwards, Buttercup sat in the rapidly shrinking section of unharmed grass, facing away from the dying cows, where all she could see were her beautiful daisies. Geoffrey sat with Buttercup, only he couldn't bring himself to look away, so instead he watched from a distance. Eventually he came to realise that it must be because of the daisies that these cows were dying. But he was conflicted with a voice in his head that said it wasn't fair, that he should have to kill them himself when it was Buttercup who had planted them. Eventually it reached a point of irreversibility and Buttercup died. In the final moment before Geoffrey died as well, he came to think that this death was going to be most unfair because he had not contributed to this daisy crisis. It was Buttercup's fault. Then he wondered whether perhaps the witness to the crime bore some responsibility, and whether perhaps it was more unfair for him and the entire cow species. It was more unfair that him and the entire cow species would die than it would have been for him to kill the daisies. So he plucked a daisy from its roots, but it was too late and he died as well. The end. So I mean, although it wasn't particularly realistic, I'm not a medical expert, and I was feeling hay feverish, so I was like, oh, may as well. But I tell myself a version of this story every day, basically, which is why I shared it with you, because I find myself very often feeling a bit like Geoffrey. I often feel like it isn't fair that I have to take responsibility. I shouldn't be in this position as a school student, and I shouldn't have to choose between my safety and my education. And it's conflicting feeling, because it is true. I shouldn't be in this position, but the world isn't a fair place. And in the end, you've just got to do what's in the best interest of the people. And it brings me to a really beautiful quote by Brené Brown. She says, "When we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write the ending." And this is so important to me, because I'm often feeling like I shouldn't have to do this. This isn't my responsibility, but it is my moral duty. And I know that if I don't act and if I don't do something with the voice that I do have, then I will be just as bad as the people that I hold accountable for this climate crisis. And I feel like I need to remind myself of this nearly every day, because it's so important that I recognise that even though it's unfair that I have to make the choice between my education and my future, what is much, much more unfair is for the people who don't get to make a decision at all. And that's my motivation in standing up for climate action, is that I do get to make a decision, and I have to make that decision on behalf of the people who need my voice. And I think that even this is a commitment that I make to myself every day. And I have to tell myself every day that I'm going to choose to do the right thing and put the interest of our planet over my own personal interests. And I think if this commitment, it's a commitment to change, and it's a commitment to writing that ending, that better ending to this story that I want to see in the world. And I think that if everyone makes this commitment, then collectively we can write the future we want to see. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Harriet. And I'd now like to welcome Alara.
I'm blown away. Is this on? Yeah? Cool. I'm totally blown away by everything I've heard so far. Wow. I am Alara Briggs-Patterson. Thank you for that beautiful welcome, Uncle. I'm going to start also with a story. I wasn't really sure what I was going to say today, so I like to be prepared, so I just have all these bits of tree here. But yeah, this is just a little bit of something that I wrote to honour SEED, Indigenous Youth Climate Network, who I volunteer with. SEED have been around for about 5 years, and it's the first network for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people between about 15 and 35 to come together and fight the impacts and causes of climate change. I'm also a musician. I play double bass and electric bass, and I do looping, and so usually I would do a performance with my instruments, but I didn't bring that, so I'm just going to do it with myself and you guys. We go forward and she goes round and round. We go forward and she goes round and round. Our mother, she's talking to us. Can you hear her? It is by no coincidence the global Indigenous sacrificed for the causes and are feeling the impacts first and worst. Cultures who understand time differently to the Western mind see as far back as we see forward. We honour our ancestors like we honour our great-great-grandchildren. Time is no 9 to 5. Time is a gift. Presence gives you the ability to receive. Inside time hides unconditional love and utter forgiveness. We go forward and she goes round and round. We go forward and she goes round and round. Our mother, she is talking to us. Can you hear her? She is crying, raging storms and floods, strong enough to easily rip this city apart. Her guilt festers elsewhere, grinding teeth, jaw clenched, watching in disbelief, her eyes grow dry. She couldn't fill the barker if she tried, even if she cried a river of tears, because cotton, dairy, and rice. Our mother, she's talking to us. Can you hear her? Indigenous uprising on the front lines, old white men quiver, squeaking childish threats, then silence. Deep down, they know we are right. They know they went too far, but trying to hold on to what's left of their power, maybe childhood trauma, hate, or spite, they continue to light our mother on fire. They pour poison down her throat, create GMOs packed in pretty plastic wrap, pop it in a box, sell it nice and cheap to us mob in the shops. We go forward and she goes round and round. We go forward and she goes round and round. Our mother, she's talking to us. Can you hear her? Between psychotic episodes of connecting the dots, inspired by moments of truth and spiritual liberation, are moments of early onset menopause and depressive neglect due to their adolescent selfishness. Wake up, she says. I've chosen First Nation siblings for a very good reason. You are the most resilient, compassionate, empathetic and fair with law to keep the balance in order. Our mother, she says to me, this will challenge you all to your core. It is time to abolish capitalism, greed, white supremacy, and war, because I won't take this anymore. I don't know what happened or what went wrong, but they became the master and I their machine. They pushed me too far. So I'm calling on the most connected, even though you don't deserve this. I'm calling on the Indigenous and the youth. You need to lead the restructure to protect our lives. If not in a million years from now, I'm going to be fine. I'm calling on you, First Nations, to the front line. Our mother, she's talking to us. Can you hear her? Cultural change will solve a climate change. And though many of you will migrate and die, my skin, my veins, my limbs will be all right. And when I'm well again, I'll invite you back to your favourite places. But for now, rest your head and close your eyes. We go forward and she goes round and round. We go forward and she goes round and round. So that piece is called Seed. I acknowledge that it's First Nations people who have those strong connections that have been built over thousands and thousands and thousands of generations. And it's not to say, like Unc said, that all of us shouldn't feel those connections, but it's to say that the First Nations people have a massive responsibility when it comes to climate change, because we're the ones who are seeing the flowers bloom late or bloom early and have noticing how that affects how we eat and how we practice our law and how we practice our culture. And to me, culture is, I think sometimes it's like, what does culture mean? But to me, it means the practice of my ancient traditions. And we can't do that how we used to do that because colonization.
Sorry.
1 more minute.
Okay.
Thanks. But I want to acknowledge that people and music, we have been saying these things for years and years. Uncle Archie said, no, no, no. Feel our anger, feel our rage. How much can we take? We are living in a nuclear age, and what the hell for? That's in the 1990s. We're all still saying it today, but it's our everyday actions and respecting our First Nations knowledge and history and creating a life that is based around those cultural practices.
Thank you so much. I really didn't want to interrupt that. It was so incredible. So thank you. I'd now like to welcome Daisy.
Hi. Is this on? Oh, it is now. Okay. Hi. My name's Daisy. I am Environment Captain and Year 12 student at Melbourne Girls College, and I recognise a bunch of you from Melbourne Girls College here today. So I'm also starting off with a story, but my story and my journey through sustainability at my school. So when I was in Year 8, we were running this day called Seal the Loop Day, and Andrew Vance, who's here today, was looking for Year 8 volunteers to run some activities. And I thought that sounded like fun. It was get out of class sort of day. It was going to be great. And since then, I haven't left the environment team. I fell in love with what we were doing at the school and practicing sustainability and implementing these ideas in our community and broader schools and communities. So today I'm Environment Captain, and I'm just going to tell you a bunch of stuff that we do at MGC and what it means. So the first thing, which is what I talk about all the time, is last term we ran a student-led environment conference where we invited a whole bunch of different schools to talk and discuss about mainly energy, but ways that we can, what's the word I'm looking for? Network with each other and learn from each other in new schools. So some schools are just beginning their environmental journey and have just started like a green team this year, whereas we invited other schools who have been doing this for years and years and years, and they were telling us things that they did. We also invited different organizations, so we had Tesla come in, AYCC came in to talk to us, and two of the producers from 2040 came in and did a Q&A with us, which was really exciting to see. So the reason we did this was really to kind of get our message across to other schools and learn what they're doing and just kind of grow as a community of schools who are really passionate about sustainability. Another thing that we've adopted at MGC is the National Parks Waste Scheme. So basically, if you don't know what the National Parks Waste Scheme is, so when you go into a national park to go camping or hiking, any rubbish that you take with you, you have to take out so you don't pollute the natural environment. And so we adopted that at MGC by doing something really, really radical, and we took out all of the bins. So there is no bins at MGC. And the goal was to kind of get our community thinking about how much plastic waste and how much waste they use and how much food waste that can be composted that they don't compost. And we really drew attention to composting and educating the school, and I think it's worked pretty well. I think a lot of people, obviously there's not going to be everyone who's going to enjoy it, but almost everyone's really adopted it and it's been super duper positive, and I think that is definitely something that we can enforce at schools and just kind of educate and make it a positive movement rather than just always focusing on the negatives of climate change and pollution and global warming. And we also have a goal at MGC to go carbon neutral, which we are working on at the moment, which is really exciting. So getting zero emissions through purchasing green energy, buying more solar panels for the school, and carbon offsetting, which is super duper exciting. And yeah, it's pretty exciting. And obviously we've been going to school strike, which Harriet does so much for. She is amazing. And yeah, so I think the overall goal of the environment team is not just to raise awareness of sustainability, but also to enforce it in our school and in broader communities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Daisy, and hopefully some of us can take some of what we've learnt from that and take it back to our own schools or workplaces and see what we can do to impact the carbon footprint or the environmental footprint, there. So now we have just over 15 minutes for any questions and discussion, which can be started off by our panellists or if anyone in the audience has any questions.
Thank you. Can I just say thank you for your brilliant presentations. Just fantastic. It's just really, really important to me for you to understand how the School Strike for Climate is a massive game changer in our community. The energy and the hope that is with that, with your generation. You are the catalyst for change, and it is just so exciting. I want every single organisation that works in climate change from within the academy and from every other group who is working on climate change impacts, including my own and Gabrielle's own in the arts. I want us all to join behind the School Strike for Climate, because I was listening to the radio yesterday and there's some research from Harvard about, we need to get 3.5% of the population. I think Extinction Rebellion are talking about this at the moment. But we have to have a broad church. We have to have everybody in it. We just can't have the people from the inner city. We have to have people in regional areas as well. And, I've read many articles about your work, and it's fantastic that you're doing those school strikes in places like Bendigo, Ballarat and Castlemaine. All power to you. So I would encourage all of us, if you haven't been to a school strike rally, to get behind it. They're so engaging, and it really is. If we can get that 3.5, we'll get the change that we can tell that story. Thank you. This forum is called, it has an interesting title, If Not Now, Then When? And after your brilliant concert last night, Yo-Yo Ma, oh my God, it's so brilliant that I'll remember it absolutely forever. David Caroli on my right here said, Bronwyn, I've got the answer. And David, the answer is?
The answer is, unfortunately, 30 years ago, before most of the young people here were born, because what we know now is that if we really wanted to address climate change, we needed to act on it a long time ago. That doesn't mean it's not worth acting now. It is still worth acting, and we definitely need to act to reduce the impacts of climate change. But some things are beyond possibilities. We cannot limit global warming to 1 degree above pre-industrial because we're already at 1.1 degrees. We cannot limit global warming, despite the optimistic views of some of the groups. Even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says it's possible. Well, yes, but actually in practice it is not. We are committed to 1.5 degrees, and if we don't act now, we're going to be shooting through 2 degrees of global warming, and the current commitments from countries all around the world do not limit global warming to less than 2 degrees. And what is needed is, in fact, what we've been hearing from all the young people here is we need more action, and we need it not just from the people who are in the audience, we need it from all countries and all people across Australia and across the world. I've been described as the scariest person at the University of Melbourne a number of times. I'm not going to scare you. There is a slide that we'll make available through the website and afterwards, but I'm not going to put it up because it's like a clock face. It's got 10 different, unfortunately, current updates on the climate science that were presented to the United Nations for their Climate Action Summit. They talk about how bad it really is and what extra action is needed. We need to double the already committed action to even have a fair chance of limiting global warming to less than 2 degrees. And that still means that countries, Pacific Islands and countries with major coastlines will be dramatically adversely affected. I'd rather talk about the good news stories. There is a lot going on. And yes, Greta Thunberg and young people are acting. We just need you to try to engage with broader communities. Art plus climate provides a safer space to talk about difficult issues. And there are lots of these safer spaces that we need to engage in and have sometimes difficult conversations with people we often don't have conversations with. People who might not be our friends. And you also have the opportunities to use networks as well as to break into new networks. You will all be voting soon. Soon may not be this year or next year, but learn about it, and writing to your politicians and telling them how you plan to vote if they don't act is a very, very powerful message. There are lots of things we can do. Unfortunately, we needed to start 30 years ago, but it is not too late. We can still reduce the adverse impacts of climate change if we all act together. And I'm hoping to help you. Thank you.
David's a real climate scientist. He's given you the good stuff. He's got the data. He does this stuff. He's been doing it for years. He's taken an enormous amount of heat from all the terrible people out there. Look, I'm a biomedical scientist. I've been speaking up for climate change, but biomedical science, we've had an enormous success over the last 30 years. People are living longer, healthier lives than at any time in human history. We're getting better health outcomes across the planet. And of course, one of the greatest threats to human health is climate change. And not just from the effects of heat or drought, it's also from the effect of social fragmentation that's going to result from starvation, already happening in the Middle East and various places, and the threat of war and nuclear war. So it's that we've got to prepare for. So the first thing, what have you got to do as young people? First thing, as David said, you've got to take control. You have to take political power. You have to vote. You have to get all your young people to vote. If every young person had voted at the last election, we might not have this government. You have to vote. This is a parliamentary democracy. There's the opportunity there to do that. You have to get politically active. Don't look for the perfect political party. There's no such thing. The perfect is the enemy of the good. You have to start where you can start. Look at the political parties. Get active. Join or vote for the least worst alternative. And then change it. You have to embrace a process of change. Don't abandon your education. Go on with your education. Become professionals. Become chemists, physicists. Become architects, engineers, politicians, bankers, insurance executives. One of the things that the government is really angry about is that the insurance people and the bankers are pushing back. Get into those communities, change those communities, be subversive, be a spy, poison their environment, make things happen. Don't abandon the miners. We need metals. Whether we mine it or we recycle it, we need metals. There's some great technologies out there. There's great technologies. There's technology for pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. There's technology for taking all the plastics. These things are here. They're operating now in our country. They're just not being funded properly and they're not getting out there. It's up to you guys. Get it out there. We're a bunch of losers. I can't be totally... I mean, people of my generation, there are some very committed older people. There are a lot of people who are real disasters. There are always going to be a lot of people who are totally disengaged. Somehow we've got to try and reach them. Why are they disengaged? They're frightened. They're living on very marginal incomes. They're frightened of losing their jobs. They're frightened of change. We've got to help. We've got to work out positive ways forward. We can do it. We can do it. As David said, we're going to be enormously lucky if we can hold climate warming below 2 degrees, I think. I think 1.5 is gone. But we can do it. But we have to act. We have to train. We have to become professionals. We have to become tough-minded sons and daughters of bitches and really get on with it.
All right.
That's great. Can I just add one further thing here? I love the way you just tell it like it is, Peter. I just wanted to introduce the organisation that I work for who are producing this event today. We're Climart, Art for a Safe Climate, and I know there's many musicians and artists here. What we do, and we understand that throughout history, the arts have played a major role in recording and reflecting and imagining the state of human society and, our relationship with the natural world. We believe absolutely fundamentally at Climart that art can not only show but can make us feel the very problems that we are facing. It can reflect on and interpret our predicament. And it can also help us visualise our possible futures. And we engage in what's called a socially engaged practice. And this is about how we feel. And if you want to change things from awareness to action, you have to feel things viscerally. And that moves us along the line to act. It also helps us to find significant meaning, and it also helps us to encourage others. I would say in all of this climate conversation today, my colleague Guy Abrahams here introduced me to a book called The Green Boat, and it's by a psychologist called Mary Pfeiffer, because these are big issues and there's a lot of grief around this stuff. And it's really important that when we go out and do things in this space, that we come back and decompress and we talk to our friends and we have people that we can talk to about this so that we're not doing this singularly. And that's an issue with a lot of artists because a lot of artists have singular practices. So I just want to say that Mary Pfeiffer talks about being on the tar sands demonstrations, and when she, when the demonstration was over, the 30 odd people went back to her house and they had cake and cups of tea. And everybody in that room said that was such a great thing because they were able to build this community. And we are human beings, interconnected. We rely on each other, and we've got to be able to talk about this with our families, with our friends, with business, with every aspect, because this is the major issue of our lives, and it's up to all of us to make this change. So over to you, Johann.
Wow. I'm so grateful to have been included in this morning's proceedings. Everything that you've said, the ladies to my right, it's been so inspirational and so moving. Thank you, Daisy, Lara, Harriet, Gabrielle, and Romy. I just, and to the so-called adults to my left, scary person, visionary, and Mr. Orator over there, Peter. Yeah, that's pretty strong. I tell you. So what do we have here? We have two ways of looking at what Garen started us off, which is to think about our purpose and to think about our purpose as something bigger than ourselves. I think anybody that engages in any of our fields actually are engaged in finding a purpose that's bigger than ourselves. And I think that's unbelievably important. You obviously all have, and hooray, we see the results of what you do with courage, what you do with actually thinking that you are the drivers of our evolution, that you can change the story. And when you talk about the Indigenous population, First Nations, there are just two statistics I want to mention, which maybe have some bearing on the proceedings today. I think the Indigenous population of the world is just at around 5%, just under 5%. And that's a very interesting statistic because that's 1 in 20 people. And the other statistic that I think is really interesting is that I read before coming to Australia that the Gen Z population is 34% of the world population. 34%, I think, right? Just about. And that is, speaking of action, speaking of determination, speaking of how with every generation since Peter talks about the lost generations, the loser generations that we're part of, that there's been, with each generation, there's been a 7.5% increase in social thinking and speaking and action. So this is we may have ruined it for you 30 years ago, but actually you can fix it. And we count on you to fix it. And I'm so happy to see actually a multi-generational group here because when you say it takes everybody, it's not just everybody, and you can do it, but when you have multi-generational knowledge and capacities, and that actually increases impact. And I think that's wonderful to see in this room. And the final thing I'd like to say before I play something for you, and I know we need to end this morning's proceedings, is that to change, I think we have kind of like two ways of thinking about things. we pride ourselves with analytical thinking, but we also pride ourselves with empathetic thinking. And I think those, generally speaking, and I know I'm sort of stereotyping a little bit, is that these are generally speaking, two different neural pathways. And which means that you can't actually do both at the same time, more or less. So all of you are capable of analytical thinking and empathetic thinking. The only advice I would give is that you gotta flip back and forth all the time, because that's the closest way to getting to your own kind of truth in terms of determining what your purpose is. And so that's one thing. I don't know if this is more or less accurate. I know that so I'm thinking, for music, that's one of the things. You can't just say, I do music because I feel it. Absolutely. But it's the balance of what you do with good analysis and then really thinking that how you can best advocate for a voice that you want to represent. And that's been sort of the bulk of my life. And I think maybe we should get a cello, which is there. And I want to tell you, I'm not going to tell you a personal story because that's one, too sordid and too long. But I will tell you a story about sort of generational thinking. And in terms of 30 years, so here's a story. I'll ask you a question. For those of you that have heard of any of the names that I'm going to mention, stand up. That's Gabrielle's technique. Aaron Copland. Okay, all right. Okay, sit down. George Gershwin. Okay. Ben, who's the third person? No. There's one other person. Yeah. Sit down. Duke Ellington. Okay. So now you can sit down. So these are all American, great, creative, American, unique voices. So I'm not going to talk about them, but I'm going to talk about their elders twice over. And so this is like an elder 30 years before they became the people that we know them as. So this elder was a teacher. And this teacher came not from America, but from Bohemia. And he said to his students, don't compose like me. Don't imitate me. Listen. Listen to everything that's around you. Listen to the voices of everybody. All the ethnic groups that are there, the indigenous people, the African Americans, the newly arrived immigrants. Listen to what they are saying and what you hear them playing. And so people learned from that elder, and then they said the same thing to the next generation. And that generation became Duke Ellington, George Gershwin, and Aaron Copland. So I'm now going to play you a little piece of music that actually comes from that elder that arrived in the States around 1890. And this is, that was from William Barton's improv, because I thought I would, to match the sound of the didgeridoo, I wanted to tune down the string of the cello so that it doesn't sound like a cello. so it can sound like anything that you don't immediately identify, oh, that's a cello. You know? Thank you. So, I just want to leave you with this one thing about arts and sciences and culture. We talked about what culture means. I've been thinking about this forever because I didn't know what it was. I thought culture, that was cello playing, or, it's music, it's the arts, museums, and theater. No, I think it's much, much more than that. And I think, to me, I think all the things that we treasure, we actually invented. Creation myths, to politics, to arts and sciences, to agriculture. And I think that what makes culture are the building blocks of values. And I think the three values we all talked about or touched on today, I'd like to my way of looking at it is that you can't have anything without trust. So anything that you do, I think you can't have a conversation without trusting that what someone else says, you're going to believe. You can't build anything without trust, because otherwise, whatever you build might crumble. Our economic system is based on trust. So when things get, worse, there's a run on the banks. So trust is not just friendship peer-to-peer, which it absolutely is. It starts there. It starts with family. But we have to, in everything we do, we have to build trust and always examine whether what you're doing actually helps increase trust. The second thing, we talked a lot about, we circled around and talked about truth. There is no absolute truth in terms of we're always trying to figure out the closest thing to what truth is, to the best of our ability, until something else happens and then you realize, oh my goodness, we have to rethink certain things. But that devotion to truth is so important. And whether it's what you say to your friends, or what the media tells us, or what scientists say. I think Peter was talking about how people who don't believe climate change scientists are actually, how does that happen? Where did the breakdown come up? We have to examine that, because without that, we're not going to be able to have that conversation. And finally, to Garen's point of working towards something that's bigger than us, it's service. I think my word for it is service. You're doing everything that you're doing. And Gabrielle, your decision to withdraw your work of art from the Biennale takes enormous courage, but you did it for greater purpose, to serve a cause that you truly believe in, that's even greater than the cause of your own profession. And I dare say you probably found greater happiness than trying to say, how am I going to get my work to the next Biennale? That's a very good track, but you obviously opened yourself to a larger world, and you're serving. So I just think that, if I had 3 words for you between building trust and just going for truth all the time, and then what you find, you serve. You keep a little for yourself, but just giving actually is one of the great sources of happiness. As you said yesterday, sharing and caring, that's what we do as humans. That's who we are. So anyway, thank you so much for letting me be part of this morning. Thank you for your very inspirational words and stories. Thank you for scaring us over and over again.
I thank you, Yo-Yo Ma, on behalf of, can we give some applause? I just want to... I'd just like to thank all the participants, Romy Nolan, Harriet O'Shea Carre, Gabrielle DeVitri, Alara Briggs-Patterson, David Crowley, Peter Doherty, and to everybody at Yo-Yo Ma's organisation Sound Postings, thank you. This event could not have happened without the support of Sonia Holbelt, Jane Burns at Ceres, and Professor Barry Conningham, the Dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music, and Professor Richard Kurth, the Director of the Conservatorium of Music. Thanks to everyone at Climart, Kat, and the many others working behind the scenes who have made today possible. And thank you again, Yo-Yo Ma.